Ja jestem bardzo, bardzo szczęśliwa dzisiaj, Szanowni Państwo, ponieważ mamy ze sobą fantastycznego gościa. Sir Ken Robinson is with us today. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I cannot say how happy we all are here in EduNation to have you with us. Thank you very much.
It's a big pleasure. Thank you, Louisa. Very much appreciate it.
Our meeting today coincides with your newest book coming out in Poland very, very soon. And it's a very special book for me, I must say, because you have so far written a lot of books about education, about schools, about teachers, but this book is for parents. And I am a parent of 2 boys, being a teacher too. So it's a very, very special book for me. And I'm super happy to be one of the first people in Poland to have read it. What was the origin of the idea? Like, why did you decide to write a book for parents?
Well, first, I hope you enjoyed the book, as you're one of the first people to read it.
Yeah, it was great, and it's full of, like, almost everything is highlighted, right? So it's all pink.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I wrote it for several reasons. One is that I know that parents are, well, firstly, parents are very invested in the kind of education their children have. They want to do the right thing for their children. They want to make sure they have the right sort of education for the lives their children lead now and the lives they may lead in future. And in my experience, a lot of parents are worried about what's happening in education.
Okay, so my question was about one of the moments in your book in which you write that we as educators, we are making this mistake, and parents, of wanting to teach our kids the way we were taught in the past, and that this is not a way to carry on education. Why not?
Well, it's not just about teaching, it's the whole approach, I feel. I know there are big changes happening in Poland now in education. There's new legislation, there are changes happening, that there's an attempt to move back to a system that you had there previously. In a lot of countries, governments, as they are in Poland, are focused on raising standards in education. I live in America now. I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, and there's been a big debate here about the way in which education can be reformed to meet the challenges of the 21st century. The problem I have with it is that, firstly, our systems of education are mainly focused on a narrow view of ability and intelligence. We focus on a particular type of academic work. Secondly, our systems are, for the most part, becoming too competitive and standardized. And thirdly, they don't address the whole range of children's individual talents and differences. I've always worried about this. Ever since I've been involved in education, I think that we have been putting our kids through systems of education which aren't designed to develop their real interests, abilities, or curiosity. I'll give you a quick example. Let's say we now have a new granddaughter, and like every baby that's born, she is a huge bundle of possibilities. Human beings have tremendous natural capacities. In all probability, if things develop in the ordinary way, in the next 2 to 3 years, she will be speaking. She'll be speaking English. She's growing up in England. If she grew up in Poland, she'd be speaking Polish. If she grew up in a multilingual household, she'd be speaking 3 or 4 languages. Human beings have a tremendous capacity for language. They love to learn. Babies love learning. Adults love learning. We are very curious creatures, and we have huge capacities for learning. Whether she is able to speak 3 or 4 languages isn't to do with whether she's capable of it. It's to do with whether she's exposed to these languages. Whether she learns to play a musical instrument isn't about whether she's capable of it. We know she's capable of it. She's a human being. It's about whether she's exposed to it or not. They're extreme examples. Whether she learns mathematics will be a question of whether and how she's exposed to these things. So the balance between what we're capable of doing and what we go on to actually do is obviously a relationship between nature and opportunity, nature and nurture. And for a very long time, I have been concerned that our education systems don't provide the right range of opportunities, the right quality of experiences in general. I mean, there are wonderful schools, fantastic teachers. There are people in education who are devoted to it, but the system as a whole isn't intended to cultivate all these different talents. So that's a long-standing concern. Nowadays, there's an additional concern, which is that thinking differently about education is critically important because of the changes that are happening in the world. Our systems of education were designed in the 19th century. They were designed to do something in particular. Well, our children, parents who are listening to this now, who have children who are about to be in school or in school, know that their children face a future which is entirely unpredictable. It's a future that will be affected by new technologies, by digital technology. We're on the brink of a revolution in artificial intelligence. We have 7.5 billion people on the planet. We're creating tremendous strains with the Earth's natural resources. We are more connected than ever before. We live in a very complicated economic, cultural, and political climate. And if we're to help our children make their way in this world and be successful in it and be constructive and fulfilled, then the sort of education they have is fundamentally important. And the current system was never designed to meet these challenges, which is why I think we have to change it fundamentally. So there's a lot of good in the way we do school, but it's not good enough. And that's why I think it needs to change.
Yeah, I think what was interesting for me in the book was that you define those sources of problems, and one of those sources is the so-called, you call them the STEM subjects. So there is science, there is technology, there is engineering, there is mathematics. Very much about Poland. In Poland, we've got an extra subject of English as a foreign language being this kind of a must that everyone must have. Which, well,
Louisa, English is not a foreign language.
That's that's what we call it.
I'm just saying, to me.
Yes, that's true. And so you also say, as you quote as one of those sources of problems, the standardized tests and competition that is grown out of it. And it is very, very much about Poland. But we live in this system, and what it causes is this vicious circle of parents sending their children to schools, and then sending the children to extra lessons of this, extra lessons of that. No free time whatsoever for like just being simply bored and trying to find something creative to do with my hands. But when you see all the parents around doing this, and you kind of feel, I don't really want to do this, but everyone does it. So it feels like a vicious circle of super parents and vicious circle of super parents wanting to have super kids, and it's extremely difficult to break it, if you know what I mean. And this is definitely something that we suffer from in Poland right now. What to do, Mr. Robinson?
Well, the issues that you describe are, as you say, certainly true in Poland, but they're not unique to Poland. There are similar pressures in most countries these days, most countries in the so-called developed world anyway, I would say. I mean, for example, there are intense pressures on children here in the US, in most European countries. I'm originally from the UK, it's true there. Our children are living in often situations of intense pressure and anxiety. Now, it's always hard to compare the way things are now are the way things used to be. There's always a tendency to shift our perspective a little, but the evidence is pretty strong that young people these days are suffering from high levels of stress and anxiety. It's not all about school. Some of it's to do with the pressure of social media. Some of it's to do with the general dynamics of youth culture. Some of it's to do with the fact that, yes, their peer pressure, they're developing earlier. I mean, I was born in 1950, and people of my generation, puberty tended to happen around the age of 12 or 13. Well, it's getting younger and younger, especially for girls. So kids are getting into puberty now at the age of 10, 9 sometimes a bit younger than that.
Yeah, I have a boy who is 10, and I'm 100% sure that everything that we are going through right now is this. So, yes.
It's to do with that. And it's younger than the previous generations. And they're also exposed to all kinds of imagery and ideas and information on the internet that we were never exposed to. So they're living in a very different sort of environment. And I have every sympathy with parents. It's why I wrote the book. I mean, it's quite right. Parents say, well, what do we do about this? Well, there are a couple of things here. One of them is that there are some things that parents can control and some things they can't control. One of the reasons that parents, in some ways, are becoming part of the problem for their kids is that more and more parents believe that the only way they can provide education for their children is to go along with the current system. And there's a story in this system. And this is the thing to point out. That there is a narrative here that people believe in. And the story is this, that if your children go to school and work hard and do well on the current expectations, if they graduate from high school with high test scores or exam results, they will be able then to go to university. And if they go to university and get a degree, then they will have a secure job for the rest of their lives, and all this effort will have been worthwhile. That's the story. And when I was growing up, that story was true. I came from a working class family in Liverpool. I was put under a lot of pressure by my parents, benign pressure, not as much pressure as I think kids face now, but still some pressure. I graduated from high school, I went to university, and I went on to get a job I liked. There are two things about this. One of them is that nobody expected that I would do the job I had been doing. And the job I'm doing has very little to do with the qualification I originally got, as it turns out. But the more important thing is that this story that we grew up with isn't true anymore. One of the reasons is that so many people are now going to university and getting degrees. More and more people with degrees are finding it hard to get work, particularly in the areas for which they're qualified. Meanwhile, about 13%, over 70 million young people around the world, are unemployed with no prospect of employment currently. At the same time, there are millions of unfilled jobs in areas which don't require academic degrees. A lot of people with degrees may be in work, but they're doing work for which they're overqualified. And the reason is, there are two reasons. One is the whole world of work has changed so profoundly in the past 30 years, largely because of the impact of technology and population growth. And secondly, so many people have degrees now all over the world, in South Korea, in Singapore, in China, in America, Poland. In South America. People are being pushed and pushed and pushed to go to university. One of the reasons degrees used to be so valuable is that very few people have them. And now more and more people have them, so the value of the degree is declining. Now, in the meantime, so that's the first thing I'd say to parents, at least question the story. Is this the right thing for your kids to be doing? Are you sure it's going to pay off in the way that you think it will? And secondly, the price we're paying for it is that during these 18 years of your child's life, these crucial years of development, in the interest of this story, we're depriving them of all kinds of other experiences which they need to have. For example, in many school systems now, children don't spend any time playing. There's so much pressure to do well in exams. We are dispensing with playtime. I'm helping to advise a global project at the moment on the importance of play, children's play. I don't know. I mean, if people listening to this ask themselves, I mean, Louisa, when you were young, how much time did you spend outdoors just playing as a kid?
I think between 4 and 5 hours.
Yeah.
Every day, and
Yes.
I'm uncontrolled. My mom only called me out dinner, and that was it.
Yes.
No one controlled
That's
me,
exactly
and I'm
right.
alive. I'm a successful adult, and but
Yeah.
now when I think about this and what we do with our kids in Poland, we've got all the fenced housing projects with
Yes.
kids kind of like barred from one another. And really, everything that you are talking about right now and that you talked about a minute ago, this is very, very much about Poland. Almost no vocational education. They're trying to reintroduce it somehow, but we have no carpenters, for example. So when my son, 10-year-old son, went to carpentry workshops a year or 2 years ago, he was fascinated with it. And I was thinking, why not? If this makes you happy, if you are good with, and it's actually quite well paid. So why not? I don't really think that all kids should go to university, but we are going through this phase right now in Poland that everybody should have a university degree, and why?
Well, it's a very important question because even up until now, it's been true that people with degrees don't automatically get jobs. That's the first thing. The second thing is that not everybody really wants to do that with their lives. Some people are suited to other sorts of occupations and prefer them. And our economies, if we're thinking just about the economy for the moment, it's not the only reason that we should value education. But from an economic point of view, our economies have always depended on people who have a whole range of skills and want to fulfill a range of different occupational careers. And that's true now. It's going to be even more true in the years that lie ahead. A lot of the professional jobs that we think that can only be done by human beings are quite likely to be swept away by artificial intelligence and robotics in the years that lie ahead. We don't know how many, we don't know which ones, but all kinds of things that we think at the moment only people can do, we'll find out it's simply not true. So that's one big reason to question this preoccupation with going to college and university. I'm not trying to talk anybody out of going to university, by the way. I mean, I'm not anti-academic. I went to university. I did a PhD. I write books. I used to be a university professor. It's not as if I'm against it, but there's this uncritical assumption that unless your child goes to a university and gets a degree in a traditional discipline, that their life is over, and it's simply not true. It may actually be the opposite of true. But the price we're paying for it is that we are inhibiting other areas of growth and development among our children. I was just like you when I was growing up in Liverpool. We spent hours outdoors playing. We only came in, as you said, for food. As kids, we were like cats. If there was food.
To a certain extent, of course.
Well, actually, to a very large extent. If there was food there, we'd come home, and if there wasn't, we'd go to where the food was. I mean, a lot of people grew up in houses they didn't know because there was food in them, and it's because. But you see, but when you think of this period of children's early development, especially, you go back to a newborn baby. In the first 10 and then 15 years of their lives, they go through the most extraordinary metamorphosis. It's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's that dramatic. They grow physically, and play is a vital part of their physical development. They grow cognitively in their understanding. Their brains are living organisms. They are very plastic and malleable, and the experience they have a deep bearing on how their brains develop. They grow emotionally, they grow socially, and they grow spiritually. And the way they interact with other children, the amount of physical activity they have, the ways in which they exercise their imaginations, how they make up games and play together, isn't incidental. It's a vital part of their growth and development. So if we have narrow forms of education where children are made to sit down all day, those areas of development are being inhibited. The other thing is, I think they in themselves generate all kinds of problems that we think originate with the children. So kids don't concentrate. They start to fidget. And so we start to say, well, they've got attention problems. So we start giving them drugs because they're not paying attention properly, because they're bored. So in all kinds of ways, we're creating conditions which are unnatural for our children. And my argument for this is that children love to learn. One of the first tasks of education is to understand what they need to learn these days. And secondly, what are the conditions under which they can learn properly? And it's why we need to think hard about how schools work. But I want to answer the question you started with here, which is that I know parents will say, well, this is fine, but I've got my kid in school right now. I can't change the entire education system. What do I do? Well, what I've argued in the book is that, firstly, it's important for parents to have a proper understanding of what the role of education is. Why are they educating their kids in the first place? And for them as parents to look properly at what sort of education their children are likely to need, their own children, for the world they now live in and the sort of kids they are. I mean, one of the questions I always ask parents when I talk to large groups is, well, I make them a bet, which is that if you've got 2 children or more, by the way, you said you have 2 children, Louisa, yeah?
I have 2 boys, yes. 2 crazy
Well, my bet is always the same. My bet is they are completely different from each other, aren't they? Because kids are all different. They're all different. So you look at your children individually and look at the range of experience they need. So that's part of why I've written the book, to say, look, this is a sort of education I think your children will probably benefit from. The second to say is, well, are they getting that now in the current situation? With the school they're going to, are they getting the education they need? The third question then is, if they're not, as a parent, what can you do about it? That's what parents need to know. Well, there are a couple of things. One is they can work with the school to try and make the changes that are needed. And in my experience, I'm sure it's true in Poland, there are many wonderful teachers in schools and school principals who don't like the system either and are prepared to look at ways of changing it within the current framework. And there's often more.
I am 100% sure that everyone watching you right now is in this group of teachers, because we mainly cooperate with teachers, and everybody out of those hundreds and hundreds of people who are watching you right now, these are the people who are teachers, and they really don't like the system in which they.
No, that's right. There is room for change in the system as it is, for teachers to make changes and to work with parents to make changes. The second option, people, so there's one is to work with the system. The second is to work to change the system. And that depends a lot on whether teachers and parents and teachers have the appetite for that. But around the world, more and more parents are protesting against the pressures on their children from homework, from testing, and from this very narrow view of education. For example, in America, there have been parents who've been working with schools to push back against the testing system. And the third option, which may be available to some parents, is to get out of the system, to homeschool or to look at alternative education provision, or at least to relieve as much of the pressure at home as they can and provide other opportunities for their children around the system. So there are some choices, and that's what I try to describe in the book.
So imagining that I'm a parent that doesn't really want to get out of the system but work with the system, there is a number of choices that I can make just as far as the choice of school is concerned. So what should I take into account choosing a school for my 5-year-old son? He's going to school in 12 months' time. Okay. What kind of criteria should I apply choosing?
Well, if you have a choice, and some parents do, the question is, what is a good school? Yes, what counts as a good school? Well, let me say what I think a school is. I make a distinction in the book between learning, education, and school. Learning is what we all love to do. It's what drives human development. it's based in curiosity and an appetite to acquire new skills and understanding. That's what learning is, as I see it, to develop the acquisition of new skills and understanding. We all love to do that. It's a very natural process. Education is a more intentional process of learning. That's as I see it. It's a more organized approach. And you can organize it yourself, or somebody can organize it for you. And for most people, their experience of organized education is elementary and high school in our national systems. A school is a community of learners. It's where people come together to learn with and from each other. Now, I think schools are very important because learning is really a social process. It's why, I grew up speaking English, why you grew up speaking Polish, why people speak Italian in Italy and develop Italian sensibilities, because we learn with and from each other. It's a very natural process that we don't learn on our own. So my experience of it is the kids love to learn. They don't all get on with education, and some have a big problem with school. And it isn't because they don't like learning with people. It's the way we've come to think of schools as particular sorts of places, where there are subjects and bells that ring, and the day is divided up into bits and pieces, and there are breaks in the morning and times that we start, and there's homework. So there are ways in which we do school which have become habits. So what I'm arguing for is let's rethink school, because the problem isn't kids, it's how we do school. It's not teachers, it's school. So what would be a good school? Well, a good school is firstly one that encourages people to learn, where they actually want to learn. Because one of the problems in schools is that kids become disaffected, disengaged, and depressed because they don't like the experience of it. And that's a pretty remarkable achievement when you think about it. It's like kids love to eat, but they reach a point where they just don't want to eat anything because the whole experience is so unpleasant. Well, there are ways of making it more pleasant. So what should a school include? Well, if you think of it, well, I know you do. As we think of schools, there are various bits to it. There's the curriculum, which is what we want them to learn. So I would be looking for school with a broad curriculum, which includes the sciences. And I can explain why I think these are important. The sciences, the humanities, the arts, physical education, mathematics, and close connections among all of these different, and languages, and close connections among them all. So you need a broad, balanced, and deep curriculum. Secondly, you should look at teaching, because teaching is not just a question of instruction. If I think back to my time at school, I'm sure when people think back at their own, the people you remember most after your friends are your teachers. Teachers are at the very heart of a successful school. And the quality of teaching, the humanity, the depth of the relationships the teacher can cultivate is at the center of what a good school is. So look at the teaching. Thirdly, look at the assessment system, because assessment is about helping to support learning. It shouldn't be a kind of dry, deadly steeplechase of competition. It should be a process that helps people learn and encourage them in learning more and more effectively. And then look at the physical environment of the school, the vitality of the environment, whether it's one that stimulates learning or not. And then also look at the overall culture of the school, its values, the relationships it encourages, and especially how well it connects with parents and the broader community. There, to me, are all characteristics of what makes a good school.
So I understand that if you were to make the system, the educational system from scratch, this ideal situation, schools would stay, not go.
Yes, not schools as we know them now necessarily, but yeah. A school is a community of learners, and there can be a school in the middle of a forest. There can be a school on the top of a mountain, a school on a boat. There could, in a sense, the people who are involved in our conversation today is a school. It's people tuning in to listen to each other and learn from each other. I mean, not everybody else can be in the conversation, but there are other ways in which we can do that. So no, I'm all for that. But it's like, well, first, there is no one way to have a good school. It's like there's no one way to have a good restaurant. All kinds of great restaurants. What they have in common, though, is the quality of the food they're serving. There's no point having a wonderful environment if the food's awful. You can have wonderful food in a pretty bleak setting, but it's still a fantastic restaurant. It's like there's no one way to write a great song. That there are many ways to do that. So that's why I'm saying let's look at the ingredients of what goes into a great school. But there are some things you'll notice that I haven't included in a description of it. For example, there is no reason for a school to be, for the timetable of the school to be organized in little chunks of time, which
and
is what
bells.
happens in...
And bells.
Yeah, there's no need for bells. There's no reason for 40-minute periods. There is no reason to divide children by age group while we're educating them. It's interesting that we don't do this anywhere else. It's not like when the final bell of the day rings, or whatever time it is. And when I was at school, it was 4 o'clock. It's earlier in here in America. Kids don't go off into separate facilities, or all the 4-year-olds or all the 8-year-olds. They just go and start mixing up again. It's only in schools that we divide them. And it isn't because it serves any educational purpose. In fact, it creates educational problems. It's an organizational device. It's not an educational principle. Actually doing that creates all kinds of problems because kids get held back or pushed forward or they feel out of step according to the particular discipline. There's no reason to divide the day up into separate subjects. There are all kinds of things that go on in schools which are not necessary and in fact are actually counterproductive. So if we stay focused on the idea of learning conditions, actually I'll give you a good example. I was doing a lot of work over the past few years, about 10 years ago now, when it started, in Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a well-known early years reading program. And people have traveled to Oklahoma to see how well this program has been working. There's a city in Oklahoma called Tulsa, and a school district there. It's called the Jinx School District. And one of the, a person who runs an organization in the school district, not a school, contacted the school district and said, we've heard about your reading program for young children. Could we help in some way? And the school superintendent said, how do you mean? He said, well, I don't know, but we'd like to get involved if we could. So the school superintendent said, well, that would be wonderful. Yes, well, let's see what we can do. Now, this other organization was a residential home for elderly people, what in America are called senior citizens, which I think I am by now, but anyway, people who are not 22 anymore. So, it's called the Grace Living Center. So they made an arrangement with the school district to create a classroom in this residential home, this senior citizens facility. And it's in what used to be the entrance to the facility. So every day now, and it's happened for years, children show up, a class of young children, sort of up to the age of sort of 3, 4, 5, and they go to school in this old people's home, as we call them in England, a residential facility. This is where they go to school. They don't go once a week. They go every day. This is their school. And they go through the reading program. Well, something very, very interesting happened, which was that once this classroom was set up, you could see through the kind of transparent walls. Members of the home, the elderly people, senior citizens, I should keep saying, started to say to the teachers, what are you doing here? This is when it first started. And they said, well, we're teaching these children to read. And one by one, the people in the home said, well, could we help? They said, yes, of course, that'd be wonderful. So they set up this program. It's called the Reading Buddies program. And in the program, members of the home, who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s sometimes, they sit one-on-one with the children and listen to them read and read to them. That's the whole idea. They just sit and read to them, and the kids read to them. They help them to read. Well, some great things have happened. One is that the children on this program are reading at a much higher level than kids in other parts of the district. And the reason is they're getting individual tuition and encouragement and mentoring. The second is they are learning much more than how to read. They're also learning about the culture of Oklahoma, because they're with these senior citizens and they're saying to them, well, what was life like when you were 4 in Oklahoma? Like, how big was your iPod, your iPhone? And they said, well, like, we didn't have iPhones, and we had ukuleles and banjos, and here we are. So they're learning that. And if you see a very young child with somebody at the other end of life's journey, there's an almost mystical connection between them. They see each other. There's a deep human connection, a bond that gets established. The third thing is that members of the retirement home who have been helping on the Reading Buddies program have stopped taking a lot of their drugs. I don't mean drugs that they need for an actual illness, but antidepressants, sleeping tablets. And the reason is these people have come back to life. They're literally living longer because they have a reason to live. But the fourth thing is that every now and then they have to get the children together and explain that one of the reading buddies won't be coming back because they have passed on. And so the children have to understand that cycle of life as well. Look, it's a very simple example to me of what happens when we reconnect the generations. And in my experience, and the experience of a lot of people, in schools where you get kids learning across age groups, helping each other, supporting each other, you get a much more vibrant learning community than if you say all the 6-year-olds here, all the 7-year-olds here, all the 8-year-olds over there. The system creates problems. So we don't need that. We don't need all this testing in schools. We simply don't. It's interesting to me that a lot of people are saying, well, why do we do all the testing? Well, because employers need to know how kids have done. Well, I speak to a lot of employers, and they are more and more saying that the kids who come through this system can't think creatively, they can't work in teams, they don't communicate properly, and we're not interested in their test results. We want to know who they are. A lot of universities are beginning to say that we don't really need these tests because they don't tell us anything about the kids. So if you're looking for school, look at the curriculum, look at the teaching, look at the assessment system, look at the physical environment, and look at the culture. And don't worry about the test results. I don't mean they're irrelevant, but don't get obsessed with them. Have them as part of your interests if you are interested, but look at the quality of the education overall.
We have this, some teachers like to say this in Poland, that grass does not grow by measuring it. So
yes,
that's the whole idea, I guess. And also there is a system of homeschooling, not a very popular system in Poland, but still it exists. And the whole idea, one of the ideas, at least, of homeschooling in Poland is that all age groups are put together. So you don't make these divisions between 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, but they are all put in one environment in which kids learn from one another. And the teacher is not in the center of attention, the king of the process, but actually it's happening much more naturally as it is, I guess, as it should. I guess.
Louisa, if I can just say, I think it's part of a bigger shift that's happening, and somebody once said that the future is already here; it's just not evenly distributed, and I think that's absolutely right. There are wonderful schools out there, always have been. My experience of it is that teachers are not the problem. On the contrary, I've been an educator my whole life. I know from all the work I've done and the responses I get and the work I've been doing that, as we said earlier, teachers are desperate for a change. So are parents. So are employers. The problem is in short-term political objectives that are being imposed on schools, which are often mistaken. But the underlying trend, I think, is pretty clear, and you see it in other areas too. It's a small but significant fact at the moment that more and more people are beginning to look at homeschooling. More people are beginning to look at the opportunities that are presented online to support learning, and they will only increase and hopefully will improve. In the same way, people are beginning to realize in other areas which are analogous that our whole approach to industrial farming and agriculture is creating appalling problems in the environment, and they're looking for more natural ways of providing food for people that are sustainable and more nutritious. We're facing a major epidemic, for example, of heart problems and obesity in certain parts of the world because of the effect of industrial food production. You can see it in the way people are beginning to wake up to what's happening in the oceans, that there are more humane processes which can be introduced into the way we raise our children, run our communities, think about the relationship with the environment, which are more rooted in the principles of natural flourishing and less influenced by these mechanistic and dehumanized process of industrialism. Now, it's always a complicated and long-term process, but the changes are happening. And I think the moves to have more humane approaches to education are part of a bigger movement. And so when people feel discouraged by them, by the current pressures, I think it is important. You have to address the situation of your own family, your own children, your own community. Start there. It's like with the environmental movement. It's the old maxim, think globally by all means, but act locally. Make the change where you are. Teachers often say to me, how do we change the education system? And, education is a very complex system, but we're all part of it. And I always say, when the door closes on your classroom, if there is a door, and there is a classroom, that when that happens, for the next hour, what you do is the education system for the kids. They don't know what's going on with government policy in all probability. But what they're concerned is about what you do. And if you arrange the classroom differently, if you give them a different challenge, then you change the education system. If you're a parent and you start to work with the school and say, why has my kid got so much homework? If you start to say to children, don't worry too much about this test, it's going to be all right. And you start to look at some alternative ways of helping them. If you give them more playtime, if you spend more time with them yourself, if you can do that, all these things are ways of changing the system at the level at which you experience it. And if we all do that, then the whole system begins to shift differently.
That the vision is great, and I think we all believe it to a certain extent in Poland too. I would like to, for the last 10 minutes, because unfortunately that's all we've got left, and I'm very unhappy about that, to talk a little bit about teachers, because probably 98% of the people sitting in Poland and watching us right now are teachers. There is a massive, huge pressure on teachers in Poland right now, from parents, from ministries, from directors, from kids. Everyone is an expert on education, and everyone keeps telling sometimes self-exclusive things to how kids should be taught. And when you look at rankings of professions which are most prone to be burnt out, and teachers are always number 1 or number 2 ranked. So is there any advice that you could give to teachers to how to stay happy, fulfilled, good, developing as a lifetime profession? Because we choose this profession as a lifetime profession, not for a year or 2. So is there any advice for all of us here, really? Me included, because I'm a teacher too.
Teaching is one of the most demanding professions. And people who have no experience of teaching and who don't know the profession often struggle to understand that. They famously look at the length of school holidays and think that teaching is some sort of part-time job. And nothing could be further from the truth. And the pressure that teachers put on themselves who are conscientious about the work is intense. they know that teaching is not just about instruction. It's about relationships. It's about mentoring. It's a deeply creative profession if it's properly understood. There are some politicians who seem to think that to be a good teacher, all you need is a degree in your subject, and you're qualified to teach. And it's simply not true. It's part of what helps a teacher become a great teacher, that they understand what they're teaching, obviously. But you only have to look at our universities to realize that knowing your subject doesn't necessarily make you a great teacher. There are all kinds of people who are expert in their field who have no capacity or not have any great developed ability to excite and enthuse other people. So I have immense respect for teaching as a profession. I always feel if you can teach well, you can pretty much do anything, because you're an administrator, you're doing all kinds of things in order to be a good teacher. I think it's very important for teachers to, it's an oft-quoted maxim, but I think it's a good one. When you fly an aircraft and they give you the safety announcement, they always say, put your own mask on first before you help other people. And I think it's very important that if you're a teacher, that you do find time to attend to your own creative development and also to refresh yourself spiritually. I don't mean in the religious sense, but the sense in which you are in high spirits or low spirits. You have to feed your own spirit as a teacher. Now, I wrote a book a while ago, as you know, which Alexander published, called The Element, Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And I was talking there about the difference between physical energy and spiritual energy. And it's an important difference because, if you do something that you love to do, it feeds your energy. You get energy from it. Spiritual energy from it. You can be exhausted at the end of the day physically and need to go and lie down, but you can be buzzing inside with excitement. If you do things you don't care for, you may be physically fine, but feel on the floor in terms of your spiritual energy. And knowing what gives you energy is a big part of living a life that means something and is fulfilling. There are some people in the teaching profession, truthfully, like with any other profession, who shouldn't be doing it. And that's not a criticism of the profession, but sometimes people are misplaced. There are people who shouldn't be doctors. There's people who shouldn't be working in all kinds of professions. It's just not who they are. They just probably wandered into it. It's a series of random choices they made, and they've suddenly ended up teaching. And if you're not good at this, or you don't really fundamentally enjoy it, then my advice always is just look for something else. Look, you've only got the one life, that we know of, so you're better doing something else. And also, if you feel it's time for change and there's an opportunity to change, well, maybe even look at that too. I did an event a few years ago with the Dalai Lama, and I remember at one point he said in a book that I was looking at before the event that to be born at all is a miracle. So what are you going to do with your life? And I think it's a very important and very simple statement. So far as we know, you only have this one life. You may have others according to your beliefs, but at least we know you have this one. And one of the biggest problems on the planet right now among human beings is depression. Levels of suicide are frighteningly high. There's some spectacular recent high-profile examples of people who thought had everything, who've taken their own lives. Young people are suffering more and more from anxiety and self-harming and depression. So it's a big issue that people are not finding peace and fulfillment in the work they do for all kinds of reasons. And if you're a teacher, hopefully you get fulfillment from the work, but it doesn't mean you don't get exhausted by it. So you do also need to find time to refresh yourself and be kind to yourself. And I think having some practice of your own and some time to yourself in any given week is very important. It is for everybody. But also, teachers give out a lot. And finding time to refresh your own skill base, your own talent, your own professional interest is very, very important. So taking courses, maybe, which are not the kind of professional development courses provided by the school. I know all this depends on personal circumstances and time, but in general, the more teachers can do to keep themselves fulfilled and engaged and to give themselves time to decompress, the better, because it's very important not to underestimate the toll that being a great teacher can take on people, even when they enjoy doing it very much.
I think I would personally like to thank you very much for especially the last thing that you said, because I am extremely interested in life energy and how to distribute it wisely, and the spiritual bit and the emotional bit and the intellectual bit that you have just mentioned. This is all super close to my heart. So thank you very much. I think we have time for just last question, and I promised this question to one of our colleagues and teachers who is Kasia, and she asked me to ask you this question about creativity, how to cultivate creativity, and I think most importantly, what do you do personally to cultivate it and to be creative all the time? What do you do?
Well, a lot of people came to know about the work I do through the talks I gave at TED about creativity, and creativity is a big interest of mine. It's not the only one, and I talk in the new book for teachers, for parents, about creativity as one of a set of competencies that I think schools should be encouraging, and I think competencies is a good way to think about this rather than just subjects. What is it that we're doing all this for? So creativity is a part of a group of competencies or abilities I think we should be cultivating. The thing is, it's important to define what it is because of all the misconceptions around creativity. And to me, there are two very important ideas which are connected. One is imagination and one is creativity. Imagination, I think, is what makes us human in many respects. It's the ability to bring into mind things that aren't present to our senses. And you can live a wonderfully imaginative life just lying in bed all day. And with imagination, you can anticipate the future, you can visit the past, you can hypothesize, you can speculate about alternative realities. Creativity is a step on from that. It's putting your imagination to work. It's applying your imagination to something. I define this as the process of having original ideas that have value. And it's a practical process. The thing is, you can be creative at anything. You can be a creative mathematician, a creative technologist. It's a function of intelligence. You can be a creative musician. You can be a musician and not be creative. It's not the arts and creativity are the same idea. They're not. They're connected, but they're not synonymous. Science is highly creative. Anything that involves intelligence is a field of creativity. The short answer, because I know time is short, is that one of the ways to try and remain creative is firstly to have a practice of some sort, to be doing something that exercises your abilities. It's a very practical process to do anything creative. You could be a creative carpenter, you could be a creative scientist, creative mathematician, but creative people do things. They don't just think about doing things, they do things. And it's a practical process that involves using materials, disciplines, ideas. It may be building something, it may be constructing a theory, but it is about applying your imagination. So you can't be creative if you don't do anything. So you have to find things that interest you and excite you. I mean, my main outlet tends to be through writing, but also working with people. I enjoy doing that. It's something that it kind of keeps me fresh and alive, I think. Secondly, it's hard to be creative if you don't feed your imagination. It's like you can't be an athlete if you don't exercise. It's not put lying up on a couch all day long drinking beer and thinking, well, I'm going to try that marathon next week. I'm sure I'm going to be in good shape for it. You have to exercise the thing that you depend upon. So, read widely, I think, is important. Watch things, take in exhibitions, be exposed to ideas and different ways of thinking, explore different cultures. The enemy of creativity is habit and overfamiliarity and common sense. So I think keeping your mind alive with the flow of new ideas, being open to new possibilities and thoughts, being prepared to travel, try things out. You don't have to travel widely, just take a different route to work sometimes. Talk to people you don't normally talk to. And also recognize there are skills you can develop that help you think more productively and do that. So take it seriously, but enjoy doing it. But you can't you can't be creative if you don't do anything, and if you don't do anything about it. And what I try to do is understand how creativity works and realize it's also connected to critical thinking, cultural understanding, and all the rest, and relationships, and be active in the thing that you want to get better at.
So Ken, thank you very, very much for this interview. It was a great, great, great pleasure for me. I would like to just show very quickly the book that is coming out just in a few days. It's called, in Polish, it's called Twoje, Dziecko i Szkoła. Do you like the name in Polish, so Ken?
I love it. And I think it's a wonderful picture on the front.
Yeah, yes, you like the picture. I like the picture very much too. So I've already read it. It's besides the fact that it's just pleasure, as always, to read you, Ken. It's very, very informative, and I think for all the parents and the teachers, for the matter, the book is just wonderful. So thank you very much.
Well,
I found a lot of aspects in it that I thought, oh my God, Sir Ken knows me. Sir Ken knows my problems. So well done.